everyone, welcome to Malevolent Autopsy. This is a show hosted by patrons featuring patron content recorded live in the Invictus Discord as Malevolent is in its 5th season. This show is chock full of spoilers since every episode is meant to comment on a recent update, so if you want to avoid spoilers for all of Malevolent as it's been released to chapter 231 or part 47, check out now and come back next time. Our episodes are recorded so you can always listen later. I'm a queen, my pronouns are she, her, and tonight I control Arthur's trachea.
I am Peppers, PinchofPeppers, but I mainly go by Peppers. My pronouns are she, her, and I am controlling Arthur's gallbladder, which at this point is the color of coal.
Yeah, poor dude.
Yeah, rip to him.
So I just wanna at the top of the episode say we did this already. We did this a few days ago. It's a Monday. We recorded on Friday like usual and did all this genuine conversation and wonderful back and forth, and it's lost to the ether. At least my audio is. There is a Peppers cut that I will not be releasing where it is just Peppers talking to herself for an hour.
I just sound
and
like
it's
a
hysterical.
fucking maniac. No, this is literally what I sound like when I'm in my apartment and then I have like a little argument. Not a little, it lasts for like a good 30 minutes. Argument with myself of something that I thought of, 2 years later after I'm like reliving the trauma of whatever past awful boss I had. So this is normal for me.
Yeah, people, when I first said that in the chat that I had lost my side of the audio, people were saying it's an authentic Arthur experience. And it's funny because we had just had a conversation in a recent episode about which one of us was John, which one of us was Arthur. And so the fact that you can only hear Pepper's
Arthur.
voice, yeah,
Yay!
it's Pepper's turn to be
not
Arthur.
John, fuck that guy. I can play piano.
I can play piano. Okay, Peppers, do you want to give us your summary?
I guess. The episode starts with a loud groaning of metal in the distance, of which is revealed to be a gibbet, a metal device where a prisoner, criminal, etc., is bound in a metal cage and hung in the air to die. It could be signs of a settlement nearby, but with so much fog obscuring their vision, Arthur, John, and Yorick have no way to know. Arthur begins a coughing fit, and Yorick reveals that Arthur now carries a piece of Horrig with him, a piece of his sickness. Arthur stresses that he feels fine physically, but his mental health has been worn down. He is ashamed over how quickly he, quote, folded over Horrig and agreed to become his apostle. John challenges his mindset, stating that Arthur was enthralled by the forest and thereby influenced, but ultimately fought for survival. His actions saved both Arthur and John's life in spite of their apparent hypocrisy. Arthur relents, but notes that he has been so vitriolic to those in his same position, and now that he is in it, he assumes that this is comeuppance. Yorick interrupts them to instruct Arthur to climb up the gibbet and retrieve something from the man's corpse. He warns them that if they refuse, he will consider this breaking their promise to him.
I'm so proud of you for getting through that.
Yeah, that's because I'm a professional.
You are. I also fully did not pay a single cent of attention to what you were reading, and I feel stupid.
Yeah, you see how I am the professional on here?
Yeah, okay. You seem to be more professional than me primarily because you show up with a written summary and that's it.
It's not like you hosted or anything.
I have a buttload of work to do on this stupid podcast that I foolishly decided to do. Anyway, I love this. I love everybody. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Anyway, good episode.
Yeah. No notes. No thoughts.
Good chapter. Great autopsy episode. I think we're good. I think we guys wrapped up.
So obviously some thoughts. Very first one is, I found it very interesting Arthur reflecting on the fact that now that he's in this position of buckling so quickly to the cultists, it does kind of feel like comeuppance. And I always am for some healthy character growth. I really do like seeing, yes, Arthur's in a bit of a pickle. I remember mentioning this in our first recording, but I'm so happy we have our sick fic, guys. Our sick fic has become canon. I'm so excited.
I don't think it's gonna be as fluffy as you think it's gonna
Yeah,
be.
I know. How about you let me talk?
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Peppers. Keep going.
So I just find that really great fodder for what could surface from the community. So would love to see some more fic of just some fantastic sick Arthur. But I do think that this is very healthy for Arthur. Like in spite of his circumstances of him being quite literally not healthy, even though he thinks that he's fine, or maybe he's convincing himself that he is. I feel like Arthur has needed to be placed in the same circumstances as other cultists that he has such vitriol against. Of, you know, thinking back to, I think it was episode 7, when he smashed that widow's head in and was like, I wouldn't be a cultist. I wouldn't be so naive. I wouldn't be such an idiot. And then now, you know, being placed in this situation, suddenly it's a lot less black and white of, well, you were forced into it. Well, perhaps you were enthralled into it. Perhaps you were tricked into it. It's not that easy. And Arthur's had these moments of direct kind of pushing back against that thought process. But this is where I feel like he hasn't necessarily been in a situation where he could like technically be considered a cultist, even though he's certain, like, I'm definitely not going to do what I told Horig I'd do. But he still kind of he kind of made a deal with him in the same way that he made a deal with Scratch. But this feels a lot more long standing, I guess. So yeah. How about you, Queen?
Oh, you've given me a turn. Thank you, Peppers. I
Oh,
appreciate that.
okay. How about maybe no. Maybe you could stop talking.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that. Yeah, I'm done. Um
Flounder alone. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start with the fan fiction that I've been reading.
Anyway, so I feel like I feel like Arthur in particular, I like seeing him understand the perspective of people that he has previously had a hard time understanding, because that moment of like full come, I guess it's like what goes around comes around. That kind of, I don't want to say karma, but it's kind of karma. I mean, it's just like, I don't think he deserves this. I just think it's nice to see him finally understand that sometimes people do things that they normally wouldn't do in order to survive. I mean, that's what survival instincts are. There are things that we wouldn't usually have a need for, or things we wouldn't say or do in the moment to preserve our life. And you would think that after everything Arthur's been through, he would understand that, but he seems to not only continue to really like go way too far in beating himself up for those things, but also he doesn't seem to see it from other people's perspectives. And I'm interested to know if this is going to come to bite him in the ass when it comes to his views on cultists and how much he hates them. I mean, his very blind blanket disdain for anybody who joins a cult or is a member of a cult. He just doesn't he's never been empathetic or even sympathetic to them. He doesn't seem to have the understanding of how easy it is to get sucked into a cult, or how, people can sometimes be fully conscious of the fact that this is a bad idea and they still are forced to go along with it. I mean, it's not always so cut and dry, and so I'm curious to see if this is gonna change his feelings specifically about people who are members of cults. I mean, he could technically be considered one now. I mean, when you start to follow a deity or a god or whatever, and you are enlisted to be part of a group, like a larger group, technically, you know, if it follows the right steps, it you are part of a cult. Now, whether or not you participate in that or you escape that, there's something interesting, I think, that might be done with his feelings about what it means to be a victim of circumstance, to be pushed to do things that you otherwise wouldn't agree with or wouldn't do, just based on the fact that it's something you have to do. If you don't do it, you'll die. And it's very noble to say that you would rather die than do whatever, like, I don't know, eat a man. But it's another thing to be part of that situation and to be confronted with that and not know how you're actually going to behave.
Yeah, to jump on that, because I think compared to all the other experiences that Arthur has had, that has slowly made him more empathetic towards cultists, especially I'm thinking of, you know, in the mines under Larson's estate, when he became a lot more sympathetic. But we've always seen them, you know, after they've been enlisted, after they've been in there for a bit, either willfully or not. Now we're seeing how it starts and how circumstance might push someone towards a deity willfully or not. And so I'm just hoping Arthur gets knocked down a peg in terms of his kind of haughtiness and how just kind of up his own ass he is about kind of his morals, and how, oh, I would never
Yeah,
join
he
a
tends
cult.
to
Like, okay, buddy.
very much sound like he's above people pretty often. It's so wild how you take this character that is so immensely flawed that we've been following for all this time, and he still pulls things out of his ass that sound like he thinks he's really better than anybody. That's just wild to me. In a good way, like in a way that I've definitely seen from people. I've definitely met people who are like, they do terrible things and then they turn around and act like they are above that. It's just wild. It's interesting to me too the way that John was able to talk him through this, but he didn't have to be a therapist. He didn't have to like coach him through it. John was very good at playing the role of reminding Arthur of what he already knew and helping him through that, but not holding his hand too much through it. I don't know. I felt like John was in a slightly different position this time. What did you think about that?
He was a lot more practical with it, where he's like, listen, I can't hold your hand and make you feel better about this, but you need to look at this practically, and you need to look at this from my perspective of, you have been forced into this circumstance and you can't beat yourself up over it. And you know, something that I also find very interesting, and it was the main reason why I loved season 3 so much, is it addressed the way that trauma breaks down not only the body but the psyche, and the whole reason why Arthur essentially kind of crashed out. The TikTok girlies will understand that one. And kind of, I mean, kind of went insane was the fact that he had no time to cope with the horrific trauma that he had experienced his 3 months in the pits and just in the Dreamlands in general. Now we're seeing a less extreme version of this, I think. But now in season 5, it's only been what, 2 weeks since he's been out of New York, and he got stabbed. He died. He seemingly lost his one friend, Noel. All of his perspective has turned on its head. He's once again encountered all of these, you know, enormous creatures that have, you know, messed him up. And so this isn't just the past several weeks he's experienced. This has been ever since he met John. It's starting to really compound. I was like, what's that word I'm thinking of? Compound interest. Oh yes, compound. Yeah, so it kind of grows into this ball of yarn that you're constantly winding up, and now it's becoming heavier and heavier and harder for Arthur to resist against these things. I think with the King in Yellow, it was strangely enough like an easier choice for Arthur, because I think in that case Arthur had essentially nothing to lose. I mean, yes, he had John, but they had already kind of generally agreed with each other that this was kind of the end and they were probably not going to get out of it. So Arthur was already ready to, cut his own throat and die, to spit in the face of a god, not necessarily as a way to escape the king. It was just a way to one final fuck you to the King in Yellow. But now I think he has more. I think it's not. It is a combination of not as dire circumstances, because he hasn't been worn down so immediately with the pit, but at the same time it's a different kind of wearing down of he doesn't have it in him to cut his throat again to escape Horig, especially when it also kind of it just slammed in his face. This was completely unexpected. He had no additional knowledge about what Horig was. So I think Arthur, once again, is doing the very Arthur thing of being way too hard on himself in some cases and then way too haughty in others. But this is a case of being, way too hard on himself of, oh, I can't believe I did the only thing I knew in order to survive. I'm such a loser. And you're like, buddy, come on.
Yeah, I feel like Arthur, he doesn't beat himself up when I want him to. He doesn't get the right cues, and he tends to linger on shit that I'm like, dude, okay, get it. I get it. All right, like move on. But I really liked seeing this turnaround here where he actually addresses and acknowledges that he has behaved that way toward other people in the past when he didn't know the full extent of their circumstances, and that was wrong. I also really liked the line, or maybe life is just shades of gray and a principle in 1 minute is questionable in the next, because that's so fair in terms of like what life is like. When you're trying to navigate the world and all of its complexities and think about the shades of gray that you face in every environment and situation, it can be really difficult to find a blanket answer that suits everything. For example, I used to work for a company that was really focused on accessibility, and we had to consider all accessibility needs, which meant that some people are really overstimulated by fluorescent lights. It's just too much sensory input for them, while other people really need fluorescent lighting because it's really good for people who have low vision. So how do you accommodate both of those people? Well, you get creative and you find different solutions, right? But the point I'm trying to make is you can't blanket say we shouldn't have fluorescent lighting anymore. That's taking away something that might be needed for another person, even though it can be harmful for another person. So that kind of in between shades of gray thing, I think deserves way more of a spotlight in all media. I wish that we we were not constantly talking about everything in terms of black and white, good and bad. I think that this show, more than almost any other that I've seen, is very good at turning what you think of as a good thing and a bad thing, a good person, a right person, who has a good point, who was onto something and who wasn't, and I love that. I will also read out this comment from Fish. Ultimately, I don't expect or even want Arthur to be like, actually, all cultists are just people down and out on their luck who were taken advantage of. Now, this is something that's very often true in the real world, where certain groups prey on vulnerable people to loop them into their web of control. But in this world of Call of Cthulhu, it is very much a reasonable thing to hold distrust and disdain for cultists. I mostly hope for Arthur to grow to acknowledge the two potentials: those who become cultists for a power for power and a desire to harm the world around them, like Larson, and those who become cultists because of reasons they cannot control and were actively manipulated into. Arthur is now in the second category and feeling the weight of it. And yeah, that's essentially what I was babbling on and on about. That fish just beautifully, eloquently summed up in like a couple of little fish bubbles. So that's maybe Fish should be hosting this podcast and not me.
No, but we love you, Fish, and we'd love to have you on.
Peppers, I loved what you said last week about some stuff that you said regarding how you thought John's like idea of humanity and how he was going to express both parts of himself, how that was going to go.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down. We were discussing when John goes to console Arthur, he says we. That is what we as humans do. I forget the exact quote. I'm not going to dig for it. But that
I can give you the quote. I have the transcript open. The whole line is John saying that they would be dead. I don't have an answer that will make you feel better, Arthur. That's not possible. And I think based on what you've taught me, that's not a reflection of what we are as humans. Sometimes we go against what we stand for to survive. Sometimes we're hypocrites.
Yeah. So that was very interesting to me because especially with John's encounter with the hag, the way that I envision John is being a mix of both eldritch and human. I've never seen him. I expected John to go about his identity a different way rather than him regarding himself still as human, but it makes sense. When he's talking with the hag, he specifically says, I cannot deny what I was, which was the king in yellow. I cannot deny or ignore that part of myself. But I also can't be fully human in the version that Arthur thinks or wants me to be. I can't be those things. I have to be something entirely my own. It's a good point that Vol Control points out in chat where they say, I feel like John identifies with humanity, not necessarily human. Yeah, I agree. Because initially I was kind of struggling when I first heard that line that John said this episode. I was like, well, that doesn't make much sense because John isn't human. And then I'm like, well, hold on. He can still, like, there's still a part of him that has grown through his experience with Arthur and with Lily and with Noel and with all these different characters that make him human. But he's not, he is a part, he has a part of humanity in him, but he's not wholly human. And I don't remember what I said exactly our previous recording, but I was actually mulling over why it is such a struggle for me to understand or to conceptualize the idea of John being human. And I think there's just a part of me that's like, well, because you can't box him in just that one identity. He's not just human. He also has the experience and just the very essence of an entity. You cannot force that into a human form. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't remember much of what I said in the previous recording.
No, you're fine. You pretty much got the essence of it. I think what was interesting to me was hearing somebody else say, yeah, I wasn't expecting John to embrace the human title as openly as he did, because I guess it's one thing to hear John say like, I am both of these things, and to hear John talk about humanity as a concept and an identity. And it's another thing to hear him in conversation include himself in a we statement and really put himself in the group of humans. I think it didn't surprise me only because I kind of understand, like, I understand his point. I don't think he was going for exactly like, I am human now. I think he just was trying to refer to that part of his identity. I like that I've given it some thought since we last recorded, and I think I like that he is using that collective pronoun because it's kind of like saying he has embraced, this isn't something other, like, outside of him. This isn't aspirational anymore. He doesn't have to live up to an idea of humanity that Arthur is giving him. He doesn't have to reach for that. He is that. Just by virtue of him existing and having these experiences, he is that identity now. It may not be the full picture of his identity, but I like to hear him include himself in saying, we're hypocrites. We're sometimes going to do things that we don't necessarily agree with to survive. Because I think it really starts to help you see, especially as a listener, where John, like how closely he's starting to fold in with this idea of himself in a way that he's always been othered. Like John has always been an entity. John has always been, the whole thing is that, oh, John's a god inside Arthur's head. That's like the whole premise of the show. It's the pilot, sorry, not the pilot. It's the intro text. It's the text in the caption all the time. And it paints John immediately at the gate as a foreign thing that is separate from Arthur, that is an other in a way that is frightening and confusing and exciting. And then you grow to learn about him as a person, and that he has likes and dislikes, and he is learning about the world around him. And it's just eventually you do just think of John as another character, which means like so much more than being a disembodied voice in Arthur's head. It's just not that simple anymore. And so I like that John is also starting to get a little bit more complicated in the way that he verbally redefines his identity and includes himself in Arthur. Fish, again, with the lovely comments this evening. Thinking again about when Arthur tells Yellow, you don't have to be human to be a person, Yellow. And that is such an underrated line. It is so good. I think that says a lot about John and his character arc and how far he's come.
Yeah, I honestly have nothing else to say. It is important to also, as like a final close on just this discussion, because I know we'll probably have to move to whole discussion, but it is important, I feel like, to also understand that, John deciding on his identity is also very much a trans allegory that has been confirmed by the writer Harlan. So I think it's also very valuable to see it in that light of deciding to be his own without being forced into an identity made by, general society, which I quite like. Because I think Arthur expects John to be human, and the hag expects John to be the king in yellow. And he says no to the both of them. I'm going to be my own. It could be a blend of both, but it's not going to be made in the constraints that these two have set for him.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to mention that John, at any point in time, John could decide to change that. He could decide like whatever the hag says he is, and he could decide like, this is actually, I'm going to take it about face. I don't think that's going to happen, but my point really is that John's assertion of himself and his identity to me was it was more complex than even just saying I decide who I am. It was more like, you might be anyone who tries to identify what or who I am could be correct at any given point, but that's up for me to decide. That's something that I get to set in stone, and I get to choose, and I get to change whenever I want to. And I think that was a big deal, because I mean, whether you are trans or not, I think every single human on this planet can identify with a journey of identity. People don't tend to realize it, but like, we are constantly and always having to figure out who we are. And from people who are, get pregnant and they have a child for the first time, they have to redefine themselves as a mother. There's people who are caregivers to loved ones who become very ill, and they have to redefine themselves in that way. And it can be as simple as that. It can be as complicated as trying to figure out where you fall on the spectrum of romantic or sexual identities. It can be so many things. It can be career based. And I think that what is so important to remember is when we're talking about these allegories and how they relate to, specifically, I think importantly, the trans experience, which I am not trans and don't want to speak for that anybody, but I do think that from what I have heard from people in the community, it is important to recognize that there are so many different ways people can identify, and none of them are necessarily wrong, but more importantly, nobody can tell you how you identify. And for John to be coming to terms with that vocally, independently, to other people, I think is going to be that final section of growth for him, and in really standing in who he is and who he wants to be. So yes, I think with that being said, we can move on to the vote. Oh wait, no, I have to read out one more comment, because this was actually from our previous recording, and Misra very helpfully has pointed out that it was read last time and it was a good one, and I want to read it again. Merrick's Moon says, I think that perspective is less one that he learned from Arthur and more something he has learned for himself. He's creating his own view of the world and learning that it doesn't have to align with Arthur's views, at least completely. And yeah, that's really a good way to sum it up too, that John has learned everything he knows from Arthur, pretty much. He's learning now what happens outside of Arthur. So I think that's very cool. So that being said, we have to talk about the vote, which is still very exciting, even though it's cashed in already. We've already gotten chapter 232. Peppers and I have not listened to it, though. I mean, you didn't listen to it, right, Peppers? Okay, good.
As I said, I was playing Dead by Daylight.
Okay, so for anybody who's listening live, do not spoil anything for us. We are going to talk about this vote, and then we're going to have a surprise. So this vote was fulfill Yorick's request versus deny Yorick's request, and the emojis for fulfill was a backpack, because I don't know, backpacking, climbing, I was at a loss. And then it was a little broken heart emoji for deny. It was at 87-13, and it did not budge. It, like, the percentages basically didn't change. They might have once or twice, but they went right back, and that's where we ended. That's where we landed on, I believe. It was fantastic to see people like Merrick's, who were definitely arguing for deny Yorick's request, just because it was not in the lead. But at the first day, when we didn't have the poll up yet, the chapter had been posted and we didn't have the poll, Merrick's was very active in the Discord trying to talk about that perspective, and I thought that was really fun.
Yeah.
How did you were also on my side, right, where we should fulfill?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I felt that the people who kind of had an issue with fulfilling the request and wanting to deny it, in my opinion, I felt that this was going to happen the moment we accepted the deal. And now that we accept the deal, we need to stick to our word, because if we don't, we have now, what, 4 enemies? We have Horig, Cain, Queen of Darkness, or Dark Queen. Oh, shoot, what was her name? Mother Darkness. There we go. Mother Darkness. So we have those 3. And then we break Yorick's deal. That's 4. I do not want to deal with 4 adversaries.
Yeah.
So I felt if John and Arthur like about looting some dead guy's body, I'm kind of like, okay guys, we've done this before. And if you accepted the deal to use a decomposing hag hand, did you really think that it was going to get cleaner from here? I think that another concern was that it was going to be kind of difficult to pull the whatever out of that gibbet. Yeah, they could figure it out. They could figure it out. I mean, probably the stupidest thing, and I don't want anyone to say anything in chat, but I hope Arthur wasn't like, I'm gonna fucking climb, and I'm not gonna think of 10 million other different ideas on how to get the gibbet down. I'm gonna climb.
You should see the little several people are typing that came up so fast. I cannot even describe to you. The second that audio flooded through my headphones, it was like several people are typing.
Yeah, I don't trust a single. Yeah.
No, everyone's being very good. We have a great audience who would not do that. I think that, first of all, you should tell people who don't know what a gibbet is.
Yeah, so a gibbet it's a metal cage that is designed to only fit like one human body in it. It's really small, it's really tight. It's usually people are put in it alive and then they die inside the gibbet. They're dangled above whatever, usually 30 feet in the air, sometimes higher. And they're meant to die of starvation or wounds or birds getting really hungry. I'm seeing that guy. Just a combination of those. It's usually meant to be like a torture or punishment device for usually some sort of criminal or someone who committed heresy or so on and so forth.
Got it. Okay, great. I think that's wondered. Yeah, Fish has posted a very helpful little image in the chat, which could have gone my whole life not knowing how cramped that was. I did not. That's not what I pictured at all. I'm
Have
so
you
glad I
not
asked.
seen Pirates of the Caribbean?
I don't know what things are called.
That's the guys in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's in the very first movie, and they all like fly over, and it's like I don't know what they have like a little sign, and then some of them are stuck in a gibbet.
I watched that movie. I watched those movies when they came out in theaters and then never again. So yeah, I don't remember any of that.
Are you even at Disney until?
Oh my God, Peppers, do not. Not on my podcast, ma'am.
You've said it multiple times.
How do you know I haven't edited it? You don't listen back to these.
I don't. You got me there.
Yeah. I just want to point out that Liz and I agreed on this vote, and I'm sad because she didn't end up having to talk about it at all because everyone pretty much voted with us, which is so disappointing because Liz and I'm deciding we're best friends. I hope Liz is fine with that now because I need everyone to know how much I love Liz and I don't hate her at all. The interesting concept for this vote for me was thinking about like whether or not Yorick, like what is it worse if he gets mad now or later? People were saying like the consequences are going to be worse later if we agree to this, and they were using the slippery slope fallacy and a lot of fear-based logic and argument, which I don't really get behind unless it suits me. And it didn't this week. So I also think that I mean it's a good point, but ultimately like Yorick has been a really useful tool and we are super isolated and we don't have any leads and we're sure not running into any friendly barkeeps right now to give us any helpful tips. So, I mean, I don't know. For me, it was very obvious.
Yeah, me as well. It just, the consequences far outweighed us kind of sticking to our guns and being like, no, we will not desecrate this corpse.
Yeah. And again, like
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this last week, it's really hard. I'm interested to see how Harlan is going to up the game with regards to putting Arthur in danger because I can get really desensitized to like, yeah, it's a 30-foot climb. What's the big deal? Like, and that would have been crazy had it happened in season 1, season 2. But I've seen this guy last in the prison pits and I've seen him have to dive and hide in these awful pits of human stuff. For me, the risk isn't really much of a risk. Arthur falls again. So I'm interested to see how Harlan's going to make this gross and creepy and make it feel like it has meaning and weight and that it's a genuine risk. I think even though Arthur has died, I think we are all kind of desensitized. Well, at least majority of people I know are really desensitized to having Arthur take more physical, I guess, hits like falling or getting smacked around.
It's just the thing is he is a horror protagonist.
Yeah.
So I think everybody is very aware of the genre that we're in and that it's very unlikely that he's not going to get injured after this.
Well, and I think people also forget that this started as a game and it is still a game. It's a role play game. It's a tabletop. Arthur has hit points. Arthur is, we're playing a game with a character and it's not necessarily the same. It doesn't have the same weight as a character in a novel getting shot. Arthur getting shot is a Sunday, So, I mean, it's just, it's a different vibe. I try not to get too worried about Arthur's wounds. That being said, I do occasionally be like, why are we putting him in danger when we don't have to? I think that's a very different thing though.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just currently at this point in time, it is, like, the risk is negligible, I feel like.
Yeah. So, Peppers, my plan is for us to listen to the episode right now
Okay.
and then come back and react to it. Now, I am going to actually listen on the stage. I know that the sound quality is different when you listen on the
That's
stage.
fine.
Um, it's up to you if you would rather log off and listen and then come back, but I'm going to play it right now.
I think we can collectively listen to it on stage. I feel like this would be a great little movie
Okay.
night.
Yeah. Now I am going to probably I'm gonna cut the episode, the audio of the episode from the podcast recording, and then you will just kind of get our reactions. So we will, for the people listening in the future, we will be back momentarily. For everybody on stage right now, we're gonna listen to chapter 232 together. So what did you think?
Ooh, that was pretty good. I think immediate thoughts. Sound design, of course, always on point.
Oh, always.
Ooh, that was. I haven't heard a noise from Malevolent that has really made like I don't want to say my skin crawl because absolutely the body horror made my skin crawl. The maggots, but this, ooh, like if I was driving at night, ooh, I'd be scared out of my pants. I haven't this kind of fear from that like screaming lady. I really liked
Yeah.
that. That was really fucking scary. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, that whole last like 7 minutes ish, my heart was pounding.
Mm-hmm.
And the I'm never prepared for when Harlan goes from 0 to 60. It just happens so fast that I'm fine, and then all of a sudden I'm like gasping. I loved that scream. That was the perfect scream. I know he's choosing from like a bunch of sounds, but that can be really hard, and I love that. I love that effect. I also I oh my God, there's just so much. There's so much to think about. And I also love that we keep getting small portions of Arthur's story. That feels very natural to me rather than these long stretches where we know nothing about Arthur and we don't hear anything about him, and then all of a sudden we get like a whole chapter of him like pouring his heart out to somebody. I like this peppering of peppering. I like this peppering of something that comes up very naturally, and that feels very normal. Like that's how it would come up between me and my friends. So I really like that he's taking that approach to giving us more about Arthur, because I think everyone would like to know more about the characters, especially Arthur, because we shockingly don't know very much about him. We know a lot about like the big points of his backstory and stuff, but we don't know, and we know about how he feels and his like morals and the type of person he is. But we just learned about his parents in the podcast. You know, because you had a Twitter interaction, but the rest of us.
Well, that was about like him as kid, but I really enjoyed that. It was very palatable in terms of not palatable. That's not the word I want to use. Very bite-sized portion of lore that we get about Arthur, so it felt very digestible. That was it. That was the one I wanted. That I really enjoyed. I just want this to be like brief, immediate ideas because I want to save the rest of it for, next week, quote unquote, next week, Friday. I really, really like. There is obviously like a tension between Alexander and Yorick. It feels very much like two opposing entities going against each other. Not necessarily that Yorick and Alexander are like entities on their own, but they represent almost like I like to imagine like two different avatars of two different religions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like figureheads,
And they're butting
representatives.
heads. And the
Yeah.
question is Alexander trying to help John by preventing this thing from happening? Is it trying to just hinder York because it knows that the eye is going to be used to create this hand of malevolence? Or is it like, is it more self-serving? Is it more protective of Arthur? Like, obviously Arthur clings very, very quickly to definitely like animals. And so he doesn't want to harm Alexander in any way, and now he feels bad that he's like scared it off. But the question is, does this animal, who's very clearly not just an animal, I think we can all agree at this point that this thing has a little more sentience than most animals. Is it there to help Arthur, or is it there to kind of practice its own gain, maybe pretend to be Arthur's ally? I don't know. I'm very curious.
Yeah, I'm definitely limiting us to just opening thoughts and posing a lot of questions and not answering them. I also just want to go on the record and say I never fucking liked that owl. I was furious when we chose to climb down in an effort to preserve that owl's life. I want that owl dead. I don't care who it works for. I have a personal beef with this owl in this podcast, and frankly, I will not rest until I see that thing dead. The other thing I want to say is that I love the idea that was pretty much my first thought, was that the idea of Yorick being a conduit, avatar, figurehead, representative of some force or deity, or maybe he's not, maybe it's just Yorick, I don't know, or maybe it's a dormant god that is trying to return to power, or maybe it is something deeper than that. But I was just thinking about the fact that Yorick represents this anonymous entity of some kind, and we're dealing with a lot of those. Thinking about him, haha, butting heads, haha, he's a skull, with other entities and other forces that have different plans or may want to specifically sabotage Yorick's plans, and how that really puts a target on our back. The longer we carry Yorick around, I almost said Horig, which we are also carrying around technically. We're just kind of collecting problems here to carry around with us, and I don't like that. I don't like that it kind of feels like we're always being watched. Maybe that's just my feeling because it's a spooky podcast, but in this chapter in particular, I kept thinking, why do I feel like they're being watched? But I really felt like Arthur standing there throwing rocks. I don't know, I could just picture the exact setting of like him doing that, and a shot of him kind of from behind slightly to the side, and something watching him do that. I don't know, it was just creepy. I had a weird
the
feeling the
foggy
whole time.
atmosphere. I don't know. I have a lot of like cinema, definitely like animatic ideas from this chapter that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. Well, there was something so eerie about Arthur reminiscing on a very simple past and a very relatable feeling while throwing rocks up at this cage and being completely alone in a quiet atmosphere, trying to accomplish this terrible thing because he has to. It was just the weirdest, most unsettling vibe. And I love that for this season. It's not like abject horror right out the gate. It's the slow, like creeping, something's wrong, but I don't really have a reason for saying that yet. There's nothing, and I think there's nothing that excites me more than that fear that it's not sudden, those lack of jump scares when it's something that creeps in and you don't notice it until it's too late type thing. I also think that I think that we should consider how John and Yorick are being positioned. I think it's continually really important that we keep getting these moments of seeing John and Yorick at odds and the way that they treat each other, because I think that further down the line, it's going to be significantly important that we've taken some kind of lesson from these interactions, and that it could potentially also be a red herring that we're being fed right now, this setup to, oh, Yorick is this quirky guy who calls John king, and John doesn't like it, and John's, unless you're helping, shut up. And it's funny, and I like the vibe, and I like the relationship. I think it's cool, but I also feel like that is the biggest sign I've seen in a long time of this is going to be some kind of vote is going to have us pick something that John and Yorick are very at odds about, and I don't know. I have a feeling that that relationship is going to put a huge strain on the show.
I'm very excited. I don't know. I'm really excited. I like how, again, the groundwork is being built on. I think as chapters keep going, we're going to hear Arthur cough a bit more. We had him have a little coughing fit here.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to see how that progresses audio wise, because it can just be like subtle things like, you know, Arthur coughing. I think it would be grating and annoying if John commented on it every time, but just adding those things in the audience, being able to put 2 and 2 together pretty quickly, understanding that no, this is a present thing. This isn't him just like choking on his spit. This is like constant him coughing. I'm excited to see what this thing is that's coming after them.
Yeah, I am too. It sounded very bird-like. It sounded very realistic in terms of the fact that it was somehow, it may be mimicking a real scream, or maybe it's supposed to sound like that on purpose, some kind of trap that or illusion of some kind. I was just thinking about it terms of the way, just to briefly go back on it because I glanced at the chat, which was a mistake. Just to briefly go back and say, I hope that this isn't going the route of the more we pick one person's decision, the more upset the other person gets until we like ruin a friendship or some shit like that. I hope that's not it. I don't think it will be.
I don't think so, because it already happened prior. And so I feel like it might be a little bit repetitive, and the writer is also very receptive to us being like, yeah, I don't know. I didn't like, I feel that this is more a circumstance of this is the risks, and I think John understands that. I don't necessarily think this is going to be, for example, like another divorce, like a build up to a divorce or anything like that. I just think it's going to be, I think any frustration John might have about the situation will be focused on Yorick, not Arthur. That's my current prediction.
Okay. Well, before I do our sign off, if I made you vote right now, if the poll was up, how would you vote? Run or hide?
Oh, I don't know. As a lot of people are saying that the creature sounds very much like a bird. See, I'm in the East Coast. I'm not that far away from the Midwest, and so I'm more the Appalachian Mountains. And so when I heard that screaming, I was like, "Oh fuck, that's like a skinwalker." But I know that we're in England, so that's not really. I don't think skinwalkers are a thing in England. But that sounded human to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Other people,
no, me too,
felt it sounded more bird-like, which fair, you know, we'll see. I think run. It already knows where they are, and if they hide, I don't know. That's a hard one.
Well, it's not coming after. Okay, we'll talk about that next week, but I would vote hide.
Okay.
Right now, if I had to vote, I'd vote hide. So I'm glad for right now we're at odds, but let's see what happens. I'm excited that we actually had to re-record this because this kind of does show how it really happens, and how we're gonna get to show people what we really feel like come Friday, and how the being a patron and talking to each other and having that time between has changed things.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Peppers, thank you for coming on. Thank you for re-recording, and I apologize for my audio being all messed up.
Oh, it's all good. It happens. I get you.
But I had fun with you. If anybody would like to listen or learn more about Malevolent Autopsy or Malevolent as a whole, you can go to linktree/Malevolent Autopsy. That's linktr.ee/Malevolent Autopsy. Peppers, the horrors do persist.
But so do we.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye.